I want us to think about this over the next couple of weeks as we look together, finding our true strength. Today I want to look at defining strength in the Lord. What does that look like? How do we find that? How do we understand the enormity of what seems to be a pretty simplistic word that we sometimes use all the time as we look and develop this stage of messaging and understanding together? We just came, as I said earlier, out of our series about growth. But in order to grow, what do we need? Strength. You know, that's how it works. The stronger you get, the more you grow, right? And that's how we look at that in all different types, physical and physical and spiritual and all those different things. So I want us to look today at the word itself, strength, and find out how we find that in the Lord. How do we get there? The word strength, we almost always associate that with physical power. You know, we almost always, we hear about, well, so-and-so is so strong, or this thing is so strong. We hear about that in a physical power way. I personally know the man. He's well into his 80s now. He's a pretty neat guy. He was the very first American in the Olympics to press 500 pounds over his head. You know, that's a pretty impressive feat, right? You know, most of us couldn't do that. I don't know if anybody. Greg probably could. I think Greg's got it. But seriously, we think about physical prowess in that way, right? That's something we associate almost instantly with the word strength. But that could be considered worldly strength, right? That could be considered the physical being that we have. In other words, we tend to measure that. That's kind of the idea that we have. We measure that by a contest, or we measure that by capabilities, or whatever the case. But when we look at that and that alone from the physical side, we also see the weaknesses and the challenges that can bring, right? And we tend to sometimes kind of judge by that character as well. Well, they're not as strong as this one, and we could look at that from, again, a contest or whatever. But the fact is, some can't see past that. I'm not strong enough. Who's ever wrestled with that? I'm not strong enough to get where I need to go. And that could be in a physical or in a spiritual way. But it allows some to be hindered. And in a lot of cases, they quit. I'm not strong enough to do it. I don't have the ability to do it. So they just throw in the towel and say, well, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to quit. So physical strength, though, what we have to understand is that varies between each person. Not all of us are in the same category. That's okay, because that's in nature too, right? Bears are stronger than squirrels. Right? But squirrels can do things bears can't do. And so we could get into all these competition things, but not all are in the same category. But does that imply the inability to be strong? No. We each have our own capacity to be strong in our own way. But the one thing that we can all be strong in is in the Lord. So how do we find that? How do we find our true strength? How do we get deeper into who and what God has called us to be? How do we understand that? Well, let's look first at the definition of the ability to apply or withstand force or intensity. That's the definition for strength. The ability to apply or withstand force or intensity. So while, yes, we can see this from the physical or the power place, I want us to consider life. I want us to think about life and the need for spiritual strength. Because sometimes I can lift X amount of weight, right? But does that give me the comfort when my world is falling apart? It generally don't. It doesn't matter. You could be the Olympic champion. You know, you could be Mr. Universe or whatever, but my mom just died, or my child just left, or whatever's going on in our life, you know, or I just came home to an empty house. What do? That's life. It happens. It's real. Okay, so how do I find strength in that moment? Digging deeper, looking further, we turn to our text and we see God is our refuge. I love the way that starts. God is our refuge. So what does that refer to? A place of safety, a place of shelter, a place I can trust. How much do we need that in life? Especially today, right? Because we see so many different things that we turn to, again, for comfort or for advice or wisdom or whatever, only to find it falls pretty short. Or that we get disappointed or we get discouraged by it rather than encouraged and built up. So we see here, as the psalmist is writing, God is our refuge. He says not only just our refuge, but he's also what? Our strength. Our strength. In other words, he is the one who gives me the ability to apply or withstand force. You see how the definition ties together with how this is so important. And so in him we find true strength, not just our physical ability, because as we all know, that changes over time. I can't do what I did when I was 20. Most people can't. We see some things come along, but it changes over time. But as we grow closer to the Lord, we should be stronger in the Lord. Amen? That should be what we're talking about. So God is our refuge and strength. A strength not measured. A strength not measured by how many reps we can do, but by the ability to endure. Because sometimes, if we're all honest, sometimes life can be kind of a booger sometimes. It can be kind of rough. Depending on what we're going through. It could be health things, financial things, family things. It could be a myriad of challenges that we face because that is real. And so the psalmist is writing this from the heart perspective of this is real. And so I cannot depend just on my physical ability to move stones or weights or whatever. I can't do that. I've got to depend on something internally that's much bigger than me. And the only way that I'm going to find that is get closer to the Lord. So when we compare worldly strength and spiritual strength, one, as I said earlier, eventually diminishes with time. That's just reality. I see that through the eyes of my dad. When I was younger, at least in my eyes, my dad was probably the strongest person I've ever seen. I've seen him do stuff that people shouldn't be able to do. I've literally seen my dad get underneath a telephone pole and balance it on his shoulder and walk across a yard with it. It's the dangest thing you ever seen in your life. But I see him now at 80 years old, he can barely get up. Our physical strength changes over time. And when we look at comparing the two, the one diminishes, but the other should be getting stronger. Regardless of our age, the closer we get to him. And in fact, the closer that we get to being with him, we should be stronger. We should be secure in that to the point to where whatever this life brings, I got it. Because I'm in my refuge. I'm in my strong tower. I'm in the one that is holding on to me. It truly does depend, though, on the knowledge and the relationship that we have with our source of strength. I talked about this many, many times. Of course, I feel like it's really the core of my ministry is relational value, because if I don't have a strong relationship with the Lord, I'm not getting stronger. Does that make sense? It's not about an acknowledgement. I believe in God. Okay. And I don't mean that flippantly or sarcastically, but that doesn't change anything. A lot of people can say that. The devil can say that because he believes in God too, trust me. But that's why he fights us so hard so we don't, because he knows how real it is and he wants you to miss out because he's going to miss out. And shame on him. But that's where it's going to go, right? And so we see that. What are we doing to get stronger? To discover something. What does that require? That I actually have to look for it. Right? If I'm not looking for it, I don't find it. That's a simple principle in life, right? So to discover something, we have to look for it. Discovering the source of our strength is no different. I have to look for it. Where is it at? This scripture tells us, and not this one, but later in the New Testament, it says, seek and what? You will find. Right? That's a simple principle. If I look, I'm going to find it, right? If it's there. If it's there, I'm going to look for it. So we go back to verse 1 of our text and we read again, God. So it's clearly defined, right? We don't have any issue with the understanding. Clearly defined. God is. So let's look at this word by word. God, clearly defined, is, that's the affirmative. There is no doubt. This is absolute our. That is all who believe. All right, so we look at those three words and we see so much just in those three words alone that really changes the whole idea of everything. God is our, all who believe, refuge and strength. In other words, he is our covering and our power. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? I mean, when we begin to realize the beauty of those simple words that maybe we've read 100 times, but we don't really think about what it's actually saying. And there's so much value in that. And it continues, a helper, in other words, one who assists us if we call out, if we believe, if we trust him, who is what? Always found. Always found, which takes us to, if you seek, you will find. It's right there. It all goes together. And when do we find him? In times of trouble. He's there, friends. He's there. He is our source of strength. He is the one who cannot fail us. So if we take nothing else out of this, if you just look at Psalm 46 and verse 1, you're like, wow. That kind of says it all. That's like the whole thing that I need to get me through each and every day. Paul writes in Ephesians 6 and verse 10, very familiar verse and passage if you look at the full armor of God and the strength and all the things that are there. And we'll talk about that throughout this series. But I love the way that it starts in verse 10. He says, finally. In other words, after everything else is shown not to work long time. And not to work long term, I should say. I'm getting my words all messed up today. I can't get my words out of it. That's okay. I'm not without flaw. But we see here he says, finally. In other words, after everything else doesn't work, he says, be strengthened by the Lord. Again, specific, just as the psalmist writes, God is our refuge. Paul is saying, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. He has an unlimited power that never weakens and never changes. So, how many of us struggle with fear? How many of us struggle with difficulties and challenges and really, like, how am I gonna make it? How am I going to get there? And that could be a lot of different ways. Again, financial health, all of them. They're all realities that present themselves to us. A lot of people just get wound up about life in general, you know? I mean, I talk to people all the time that either call me or come see me or whatever, and different people are really, really struggling with things right now. Now, again, and that's not to cast aspersions or take anybody's thing less serious over the other. Everybody's got a different thing, right? But we see the division that's going on in the world, and we see the hectic nature of everything that's happening in the world. And not everybody handles it well. You know, how am I gonna deal with tomorrow? How am I gonna deal with the fallout from this? How am I gonna deal with the election? I mean, we see all this stuff that is going on in the world. It's got everybody upended. Okay, but if we look back to what is being said to us in this verse, God is my refuge. He is my strong tower. He is the strength that I have. And so when I talk about struggling with fear, when I'm talking about struggling with, I'm not talking about just, the phobias that we have, bugs and snakes and all those kind of things, but the fear of life, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the worry about surviving. Here is where we read the value of knowing the source of our strength in times of trouble. Because in times of trouble, that does not always mean peril, okay? It does not always mean, a tornado or a flood or a hurricane or something like that, or I fell down and can't get up. Those are moments that we're struggling, but that is not necessarily what he's talking about here. What about on the days when we wake up in the morning and we say, I just can't do it. Today is just not my day. I just can't do it. Do we need strength in that moment? Do we need strength when we're just ready to pull the covers up and just say, yeah, that's just not going to work for me. It's just not going to work for me today. I'm just not ready to face the world. I'm not ready to deal with life. I'm not ready to deal with the family. I'm not ready to deal with work. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's real. That's real. There was once a guy, one morning he was that way. He was in his bed. He's got the covers pulled over his head, and he's hearing this consistent knocking on his door, saying, you got to get up, you got to go. But I don't want to. I don't want to deal with those people. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And she said, but you need to be in church this morning. You got to go. You got to go. People need you there. They want you there. But I don't want to. I don't want to deal with those people. But you have to go. You're the pastor. I mean, that's real sometimes. Yeah, I don't feel that way. No, but seriously, we need those. We have those moments. Okay, we have those moments to where I just can't do it today. I just can't do it today. And quitting seems so much more appealing. It's just easier because I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to close the door, turn off the lights, and that's it. I'm not going to deal with it today. What do we do in that moment? How do we handle that? We read here in verse 2 that if we know the source of our strength, it says, therefore, we will not be afraid. Now that's easier said than done, right? But think about what he's saying here. We said we will not be afraid. What does that mean? I'm trusting in the one that's stronger than me. I'm placing my life in his hands because I can't do it today. That's not an embarrassing place to be. That's a humbling place to be. To know and to hold on to the fact that I've got one I can count on. I've got one that I can lean on. I've got one that I can go to. That's a wonderful, wonderful truth. The one who cannot fail me, the one who is not against me, just like we heard in that song, the one who is for me, the one who is in it with me and has never forsaken me, the one that is working through me in spite of me, the one that is working and fighting forever and ever and ever for me. He's on my side. That's the one that we need to lean on. That's the one that we hold on to. And so we read here, therefore, in other words, as a result of verse 1, that God is my refuge and my strength and the helper is always found in time of trouble. As a result of that, therefore, we will not be afraid. Though the earth trembles, in other words, speaking of uncertainty, and that's real. Uncertainty happens. It speaks of being unsure about the results. I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but I'm just trusting God. And then the mountain topples. What I saw as strong, what I thought I could count on, it fell down. Have we ever been there? All the time. It happens all the time. And people handle it differently. Some get very discouraged and shrink away. Others like, okay, there's got to be something better. It's all about perspective. It's all about where we go. He says, though its water roars and foams, in other words, trying to put forth strength, but it has no substance. It's all bark and no bite. It's noise and fluff, a scare tactic. That's what the enemy does all the time. I want to scare you. I want to keep you from going in here and showing you what this is and how it'll change your life. The psalmist here is saying that when we know our source of strength, not maybe so, not might be, but truly know him, it changes everything, even when it's all falling apart. Now again, that seems like a very, very simple, just kind of blanket offering. But that's what God says. I am your refuge. I am your source of strength, if you'll trust me. But that's where we have to get me out of the way, right? That's where we have to get our doubts and concerns and all these things. We have to get that out of the way so that we can see something bigger than us. And that's why we says here, if he remains constant in our life, he is our refuge in our strength and a helper who is always found. You know, and that's a comforter. It should be for each and every one of us as we're looking, because the days that go by sometimes make us weaker. You know, because we just don't feel as strong as we need to be, because it seems to be an overwhelming task at times. This is just too hard. This is just too big. And again, we look beyond the physical, because the physical, sometimes we say, well, I'll lift it today. I don't feel like it, but I'll do it today. It hurts my back, but I'll do it. I'll keep going. The physical sometimes, because it's a requirement for a job, or maybe we're in an exercise program, so we suck it up and go. Spiritually, that's not always the case. Mentally and emotionally, that's not always the case, because sometimes we have that moment, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. When things do not feel safe, what do? We look for a shelter. You know, like in a storm. I mean, some of our friends in Texas today are going through, there's a big storm coming down their way, all right? So we look for a shelter. We look for some kind of strong protection, a place out of the elements. A place that is going to keep me safe. It's going to keep the rain off of me. It's going to keep the lightning from getting me, hopefully, or the flood, or what. So we look at it from that perspective. How am I going to find a place that is safe? But where do we go? Where do we go when life tosses us around like a boat out in the sea? You know, you've seen the movies, right? We've seen the movie. Maybe you've been on one of those. You know, maybe you were on a cruise, or maybe you were out fishing, and a storm came up, and boy, that boat is rocking and rolling. It's kind of makes your stomach kind of not feel so good, right? So we've seen that. Where do we go when life makes us feel that way? Where do we go when everything is kind of upside down? We again see the answer found in verse 1. God is our refuge. We can't repeat that enough. God is our refuge. Why don't you say that with me? God is our refuge. All right, and understanding the value of that word, understanding that a place of safety and shelter, a strong tower that we can run into, that mighty fortress that we will not fail and it won't fall down. But do we seek him or something else? That's where the differential comes into the result. Am I seeking the answer or an answer? Because there's two different things. The answer, that's why Jesus was always affirmative when he said, I am the way, the truth, the life. I am the door. I am the good shepherd, not a. Because that changes the meaning. Okay, that's why the value of knowing what does it actually say makes a big difference. Because there are different groups that teach different things. And some will say, a. But it's never a. Because that means there's an option. That means there's a more than one. God is the refuge. He is the source of strength. He is exactly what we need in all ways. So do we seek him or something else? Because we cannot place our faith in our human abilities. Because that only takes us so far. Now again, that's not degrading or demeaning in any way. But we all know that. We can only do so much. You can only run so long. You can only move so much. You can only know so much. We have a limited ability, but God doesn't. He is all-knowing. He is ever-present. He is everywhere. He is all things to all people. And so we understand here, finding our true strength is a journey. It is a journey, and it takes time to realize, hey, this is true. This is true. He really is my help, and I can always find him when I look for him. But I have to trust him. I have to go and call on him and go as he says go. See, this journey is one that carries me through all the valleys and through all the hills and through all the trails and roads and goods and bads and uglies. But if I keep looking, I will find him. If I keep looking for my source of strength, I will find him, and I will find what he offers, and I will find that it is exactly what I need. And that's the thing. Am I willing to look? Because that's where we struggle. Because what happens a lot of times if we're looking for something and we don't find it within the first 30 seconds? I'll worry about it later. Okay? I'll do it tomorrow. And sometimes does tomorrow come? It don't get here either, right? And we keep looking, or we don't look anymore, and then one day you stumble across it because it was right there where you left it to start with. We're all guilty of that, right? But when we think about trying to find the strength that we need for this life, this journey that we call life, we got to keep looking, friends. Because if we give up, and you've heard me say it 1,000 times, if you don't quit, God won't quit. I believe that. Because if we give up, we remove ourselves from our source of strength. We find ourselves sitting in the corner with the lights out, wondering, is it ever going to get better? But we're relying, and that's not in any way to look down upon someone that's struggling. But if we're only relying on me to fix it, or we're relying on a diagnosis to fix it, or a pill to fix it, and I'm not putting that down, but that won't fix it. There's only one that can actually fix it. It's one thing to repair it. It's another thing to fix it. Okay? Repair is just a temporary patch. That's just until the next storm comes by and blows off the shield or the shingle, right? I need a new roof. And sometimes that's just the case. Sometimes you can't just patch it. Sometimes it's beyond that. Sometimes you got to fix it. And most of us get to that place somewhere in life. I'm beyond the patch. I got to get fixed. Not in the veterinary kind of way. That's different. But sometimes I got to get fixed. And so we understand, what does that mean? I got to find my source of strength. I've got to find the one that can get me through this. So getting stronger. Again, we first think of repetitions with weights. What was heavy, what was hard is now manageable. That 10 pounds now is nothing, where now I need 20, now I need 30, and you go on. We think about that. It gets stronger and stronger. But grasping firmly that in those times of trouble, the one that we do have, the one that we can trust, the one who cannot fail, the one who says, if you call upon me, that I will give you the strength to not be afraid, that I will give you the strength to get stronger, that this impacts not just us individually, but it impacts those around us. Because if we have one that is strong in our presence, what helps us? It helps us get strong too, right? That's why strong leadership is so important. Not just nationally, but in our families. And within our church family, if we have someone that is weak and they don't really know what they're doing, well, you kind of follow suit with that, and you don't really have any courage or any strength or any respect or any kind of knowledge or anything about that, because you're like, well, heck, they don't know anything. Why would I listen to them? We need one that we can turn to that will never fail us. And this is why God is saying, if you follow me, if you'll come to me and let me be your refuge and your strength, the helper that is always found in times of trouble, you will not be afraid, even when the earth trembles, even when it all falls apart. I will be there. So together, not to be political at all, but we're stronger together if we will hold on to our source of strength, as we will hold on to one. Because as we get stronger, and before long, we become unbreakable, because God is our refuge. In other words, the enemy can bring every lie that he wants to bring, and we just tell him, get under my feet where you belong. Get behind me where you belong, because you have no say, you have no strength, you have no nothing, because you have been defeated. We get to say that. We get to hold on to that because we believe in what God has shown us here. Psalm 92 in verse 2 says, I will say concerning the Lord, who is, again, affirmative, my refuge. We see that word again, and my fortress. So we see the repetitive nature of this, but we also see the repetitive nature of the word my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Make it personal. David writes in Psalm 23, the Lord is whose shepherd? Mine. Take it personal. It's okay. He wants you to. The Lord is mine. And so he says here, I will say concerning the Lord, who is my refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Friends, it's a journey. It's a journey to get there. But as with all journeys, it takes the first step to get to the destination, right? It takes the first step to get it started. I'm going to so-and-so. Well, until you turn the car on and take the right hand or the left hand turn, you ain't going to get there. Okay? As you've heard me say before, you get nowhere behind a parked car. You got to get moving, right? If we're going to get to the destination, it takes that first step. Gospel singer years ago, a lady named Janet Paschal, she had these words from a beautiful song. I'm not going to try to sing it because it's too overwhelming, but listen to these words. When clouds of doubt hover over me and the storms of life toss me to and fro, there's a place of refuge that I can go. He's a shield over every tempest. He's an anchor sure and true. In times like these, it's so good for me to know that God is my refuge. He's a strong and mighty tower that I can run to. God is my refuge. Oh, without him, tell me, what would I do? Man, I love that. I wish you could hear her singing. That'd blow your socks off. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All right, we know this by heart. We repeat it. We wear it on hats and T-shirts and everywhere. We quote it. We live it. We love it. All those things. But do we live it out? There's the challenge. I can do all things. I can do all things through Christ. All right, so we can't leave that part out. We can't leave the source of strength out, right? I can do all things through Christ. And so knowing our source, how do we get there? When we're looking at that strength building, how do we get there? Knowing our source is key. It is the beginning of knowing where our refuge is. It is the must, if you will. It is the learning to trust him, to let him remove the fears and help us become more than conquerors. It is letting him do what he says he can do and trusting that he can do that. And it is getting me out of the way. And that's our biggest obstacle most of the time. So, can I do all things? No. No. But he can. But he can. And I'm going to follow him all the way home. Do we believe that today? Do we believe that today? Are you struggling today? It doesn't matter what it is, friends. No, it doesn't matter. And I don't say that in a not caring way. I'm saying there is nothing he can't do. God is our strength and our refuge. Whatever you've got dealing with today, you can give it to him. You can give it to him. Are you in need of answers today? The praise team is going to be coming up. And let this song, that at all times, this is what this passage is about. God is our refuge. He is our strength. He is the one that we can come to. Even when everything else is falling down, the mountains are coming and everything's trembling and the earth is rocking and rolling and the sea is tumbled. I mean, we feel that way. We've been that way. We can bring it to Him. We can come to His altar, whether it's a physical one or we can come before His presence and we can say, Lord, help me. That's what Peter said, Lord, help me. Strongest 3 words in the whole entire of the Bible. When we think about that beauty today, if you've never done that, if you've never surrendered your heart to Him, let today be today. If you're struggling with something that you feel like is bigger than you, that's okay. We've all been there. Let Him have it. He can take care of it, and He'll change your life forever. I believe that with all my heart.